it's already too late. The thirst mechanism is a sign of dehydration. It's not a sign of I'm becoming dehydrated. So we want to avoid any sort of thirst at all costs. What is going on, everybody? It is Hopper once again, and we got Brutus in the house. Plus, of course, we've got the Ultimate Warrior. We got a great topic for you today. We will discuss hydration, blood viscosity, the Frank-Starling mechanism, and why it all matters. So, I understand that adequate hydration throughout the day can certainly have its challenges.
Water!
But it needs to be done regardless. We need to stay hydrated for numerous reasons, and here's why. So the first thing that we will discuss is the Frank-Starling mechanism. Frank-Starling mechanism is a basic concept. All it is, it's a pre-stretch of the heart. And so if you have your lungs up here, okay, and then you're gonna move into the ventricles of the heart, all this nonsense, forgive me for the brevity right here. I'll add some more diagrams throughout this entire video to further illustrate my talking points. And I'll put a couple descriptions in the description box below. But for now, when we're looking at the lungs and we're looking at the heart, the ventricles, as the blood comes back in, as the blood picks up fresh oxygen from the lungs and it comes back in and it dumps into this ventricle, the ventricle will get a bit of a pre-stretch in through here. As this tissue stretches out more in through this area, that's going to generate more of a contractile propulsion force, okay? So this will actually come into play here a little bit later on. Just understand that this pre-stretch right here is natural and will happen to everybody, but it can be affected in a couple different ways. One of which is going to be the blood viscosity. So as we continue throughout our exercise and this pre-stretch, we'll notice that the pre-stretch becomes greater and greater and more blood can be sent out to the tissues because the contractile force improves its force production. So with blood viscosity will be the resistance to flow. And you'll see a diagram right here. There are many components that will influence viscosity, and one of the main ones is going to be your hydration. So provided that we are adequately hydrated, we will have a much lower viscosity, a much lower resistance to flow throughout our veins and arteries, which is what we want. When we move back into this pre-stretch of the heart, we'll just kind of go like this right here. As this blood, this fresh blood dumps back into the ventricle, if this blood that's moving is at a really slow rate and it's all kind of disgusting and sludgy and looks like mud or some sort of pink kind of like goo.
Unbelievable.
Huh? Did I tell you? I wasn't lying, was I?
This blood moving back in to this ventricle is going to be slow. And thereby, when it hits into the ventricle, the pre-stretch of the tissue will be pretty minimal. And if the tissue is stretching out this way to create that contractile force to come back in, we want that blood to be propulsed back out into the body at a high rate. And for those of you that feel fatigued during exercise and you feel as if maybe you can't breathe that well or catch your breath or keep your body oxygenated, if we even have 1% of dehydration, that will influence your performance in a negative manner.
And his first pitch was not great, just a bit outside.
1% dehydration, or God forbid even more,
And I'm dehydrated, Bob!
that will increase the viscosity of your blood, make it thicker like nasty sludge. And as it moves through your veins and arteries, as it gets through the lungs and gets oxygenated and it moves back into the ventricles to be pumped back out, the pre-stretch of the heart minimizes. It turns back into these little arrows rather than these arrows, the longer ones. The longer these arrows are, the bigger the pre-stretch, the stronger of a contractile force that we will get to propel the blood out to those tissues. And when we look at a red blood cell, we need to understand that there are 4 spots of oxygen.
Well, it's Mozart, Robert. Can you?
The better that these red blood cells can be sent to the tissue, the more oxygen can be easily unloaded off into the tissue onto the myoglobin and then sent to the mitochondria. So the easiest way to increase your cardiovascular fitness and to improve your ability to consume oxygen is with better hydration, because it will influence the Frank-Starling mechanism, because the blood viscosity will be less. It'll have a smaller resistance to flow. The better the tissue pre-stretches, the more of a propulsion that it will generate to send that blood to the respiring tissues. And this chart right here will also show the difference of stroke volume as the sympathetic nervous system continues to function throughout exercise. And I can't stress this enough, how often the dehydration will occur if we actually start to feel thirsty. It's already too late. The thirst mechanism is a sign of dehydration. It's not a sign of I'm becoming dehydrated. So we want to avoid any sort of thirst at all costs. And again, if that blood starts to increase its viscosity and has a difficult time flowing, if we understand that forces occur in pairs because of Newton's laws, the force that's coming down into the ventricle, if it's slow and the velocity is slow of the blood, it's just not going to generate that much of a pre-stretch on the heart. And therefore, if there's not much of a pre-stretch, there's not much of a contractile force on the heart, and the blood doesn't get sent to the tissues, and it just perpetuates itself. Because the red blood cells aren't being sent to the tissue, then the oxygen cannot be unloaded onto the myoglobin into the tissue, and then the myoglobin can't bring the oxygen to the mitochondria, and then we struggle to regenerate ATP. And if we struggle to regenerate ATP, we can't contract our muscles.
And grisly ghouls from every tomb are closing, for no mere mortal can resist.
So, for better overall performance, you can easily just increase your hydration. So regardless of whatever obstacles are in someone's way of hydrating properly throughout the day, it needs to be done. There's no questions, especially if an athlete is an oxidative athlete and they require oxygen throughout their sport, unlike a weightlifter. I mean, even weightlifters still need to be hydrated. This idea of adequate blood flow is going to be significantly correlated to how well the athlete is hydrated. And another reference that we can account for is the Fick equation. And the Fick equation right here will account for VO2. And the VO2 or VO2 max will have the units of milliliters per kilogram of body weight per minute. So how much oxygen we can consume per kilogram of body weight per minute. And when we look at the VO2 is actually found in the Fick equation. And the Fick equation is an equation that we can use to determine how much blood flow an organ receives, provided that we know a few different aspects. And once again, if we go back to the VO2, how many milliliters of oxygen that we can consume per kilogram of body weight per minute is all going to be dictated on how much of that red blood cells that we can get to those tissues. If the blood is adequately hydrated and we have a low viscosity, we will easily get those red blood cells to the tissue, thus increasing the total overall VO2 max. So we want to ensure that when the blood is adequately hydrated and the pre-stretch of the tissue is significant, like these two arrows, that the blood being propelled to the respiring tissues will look like this. As opposed to if we were dehydrated, looking like Brutus right here, and the pre-stretch is only these smaller arrows, the blood being pumped to the respiring tissues would look like this. And then we would be in a hot mess. Wow. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for your time. For those of you that have any questions about hydration or the Frank-Starling mechanism or blood viscosity, please feel free to send me an email, as my contact information is in the description box below. For those of you that wish to support the creation of this content, please feel free to also visit the links in the description below. Please like this video, subscribe, all the internet nonsense that everyone already knows about. Leave some comments, share this video, and stay hydrated, my friends.
I am parched. That's better.